Hi everyone, and welcome to The Sleepy Scientist. I'm really happy you're here. Tonight, we're going to go on a calm and quiet trip to learn something amazing. So get comfy, take a deep breath, and let's enjoy this peaceful science story together. Before we start, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it for you right now? If you like relaxing science videos, don't forget to tap the like button. Now let's begin.
There are tiny threads of glass that live in silence. No thicker than a strand of hair, no brighter than a flicker in the dark, these threads hold a secret. They can think, not in the way your mind dances between memories and feelings, but in a quieter, purer rhythm, one made of light. Deep inside our machines, where the world cannot see, the age of electrons begins to drift away. For more than 100 years, we have relied on small charges zipping through copper paths, ones and zeros traveling in waves too slow for the dreams we now carry. But something softer is coming, something faster. A language not made of sparks, but of light itself. Light does not walk, it does not crawl or stumble, it flies. Where electrons need time to travel, photons, those tiny bundles of light, simply appear. They are born into motion. And when we ask them to think for us, to hold and carry and sort information, they do so without weight or resistance. Imagine a chip, but not like the ones in your phone or your laptop. Imagine a chip laced with transparent veins, where light flows like water through a mountain stream. These are optical chips, born from the marriage of silicon and glass, physics and hope. Instead of using electric current to compute, they use beams of light. Lasers so thin you cannot see them, pulsing inside pathways curved like rivers. Now imagine you are very small, small enough to walk inside one of these chips. It feels like a cathedral made of crystal. The walls shimmer faintly with unseen energy. You hear nothing, but you can feel the rhythm, the gentle hum of data moving in silence. This is where thinking begins, not with noise or electricity, but with light dancing in harmony. To make light think, we need to teach it how to slow down. Pure light moves too fast to hold. So scientists shape materials like silicon and indium phosphide, coaxing the beams to bend, reflect, and pause. Like mirrors in a maze, they guide each photon through logic gates, tiny intersections where decisions are made. These gates do not clang or click, they shift softly. A slight change in phase, a subtle interference pattern, and suddenly the light knows which way to go. It is a ballet of interference and diffraction, where every step carries a piece of meaning. And because light can travel many paths at once, it can hold many ideas in its beams. The reason we do this, the reason we chase the mind of light, is because the world is growing faster than our machines can follow. Artificial intelligence, deep learning, global networks, all of them need speed. But more than speed, they need grace. Light offers both. Photonic chips can compute at trillions of operations per second while using less power than their electronic cousins. Where electrons create heat and delay, photons simply move. They do not collide, they do not resist, they flow. But building a brain of glass is not easy. It takes layers upon layers of invisible design, microscopic gratings etched with patterns finer than dust, tiny lasers grown like crystals, and most delicately, the alignment, the way every wave must match another, like musicians tuning their instruments before a symphony begins. In one lab, scientists tune these chips by hand, using heat and pressure to bend the paths of light. In another, algorithms shape the layouts automatically, learning from trial and error how to build the perfect maze. And yet, no matter how advanced the tools become, the core principle remains poetic. We are teaching light to think. And light, it seems, is a willing student. There is something ancient about using light this way. For billions of years, light has written the language of stars and fireflies, oceans and eyes. It paints the colors of dawn and reflects in the puddles of rain. Now, for the first time, we ask it to become a logic gate, a keeper of numbers, a bearer of thought. Some call it photonics, others call it optical computing, but at its heart, it is a story of transformation, of taking something soft and untouchable and asking it to carry the weight of knowledge, not with brute force but with elegance. And when we succeed, the result is almost silent, a chip that glows faintly with no heat, a processor that dreams in pulses, an intelligence that runs on photons instead of electrons. It is the beginning of something new, yet also a return to the purity of motion, to the clarity of light. Let us rest here for a moment, inside the glow of this possibility, in the quiet brilliance of a chip that thinks with threads of glass. Let's drift deeper into the soft corridors of this glowing mind. Inside these glass threads, computation takes on a different rhythm. No longer the hard tick-tock of silicon clocks, but a fluid symphony where data flows like wind over water. Each photon is a note in a song too fast to hear, too small to touch, yet somehow it plays the future. Light in its purest form doesn't age or tire. It doesn't rust or erode. It doesn't bump into itself the way electrons do. Instead, it threads its way across tiny bridges and whispering bends, changing phase, twisting polarization, bending slightly here to take a left, or slowing just enough to hold a bit of memory. These chips aren't just faster, they're quieter, they hum instead of shout. And in that hum is a kind of calmness, a computation that feels alive not by heat or noise but by clarity. What makes this all possible is not just the light, but the way we sculpt it. Through materials born from stardust, glass spun from silicon, mirrors built from nanostructures, we tame photons without cages. We offer them paths and they choose with elegance. Each choice becomes a logic gate. Each bend becomes a calculation. And all of it happens at speeds that no neuron, no wire, no heartbeat can follow. But this speed is not cold, it's full of nuance. Imagine trying to describe a dream to someone who doesn't sleep. That's what it's like teaching light to process thought. We must give it structure without confining it, logic without weight. And that's where the poetry lies, in the careful intersection of waveguides, where light pulses split, rejoin, interfere with themselves to say yes or no, true or false. It is a language made of brightness and absence, of peaks and dips, no moving parts, no copper wires. Just interference patterns like ripples on a pond, and like those ripples, the result is delicate. You cannot grab it, only feel its shape in motion. Optical chips whisper their logic through patterns of light and shadow. They solve equations in silence. They hold ideas in the geometry of reflection. Outside in the larger world, these chips sit inside machines that barely hint at the wonder within. A server rack glowing faintly. A lab bench wired with lasers and lenses. But if you look closely, if you peer past the metal and cables, you'll find the serenity of something ancient being born again. Because light has always been the storyteller of nature. It tells us where the sun is in the sky, where a flower blooms, where an eye meets another. Now it tells us something else, how to think faster than thought itself. In optical neural networks, light takes on new purpose. Beams are trained just like data. They are modulated by weights, adjusted by gradients, passing through layers not of silicon, but of precisely arranged phase shifters and interferometers. And because light doesn't forget, it moves with confidence, no lag, no hesitation. It learns by moving forward always. This opens doors to dreams we could never reach with electrons, real-time language translation, medical diagnostics that happen as fast as a heartbeat, autonomous machines that respond before danger appears. And yet, despite all this speed, there's something peaceful about it, like watching a bird glide instead of flap, like drifting in a quiet stream instead of running. That's the paradox of light. It is the fastest thing in the universe, but when harnessed right, it feels like stillness. As if the world slows down to let it pass. Even more beautiful is the way these chips share space with color. Because photons can carry different wavelengths, a single waveguide can carry many channels at once, each beam a different hue of logic, each frequency a separate conversation. This is called wavelength division multiplexing, and it allows a chip to think in parallel, like a mind with many voices singing in harmony. Where electrons crowd and interfere, photons glide past one another like dancers in perfect formation. It's elegant not just in theory but in practice. But every dance needs choreography, and the engineers behind these chips are part scientist, part artist. They draw maps of refractive indices. They curve waveguides with the patience of gardeners. They write algorithms that sculpt light not just for efficiency but for grace. And the result is computation that doesn't feel forced. It feels alive, like something grown rather than built. That's the quiet revolution, machines that don't roar but breathe. And beneath it all is a longing, a soft yearning for simplicity, for moving past the age of electricity and noise into something purer, not to escape complexity but to handle it with grace, to process data the way a forest processes sunlight, not with greed or excess but with balance. These chips are not just faster computers. They are new ways of listening, of thinking, of being. As we turn toward a future filled with light, we begin to notice how much of the world already works this way. Bioluminescence in deep-sea creatures, sending glowing messages across black waters. The iridescent flash of a butterfly's wing encoded with structural patterns. Even our own bodies use light in the form of photons released in cells, a faint biophotonic glow that may hold messages we don't yet understand. Maybe we are not just learning to use light. Maybe we are remembering a way of knowing that predates wires and code. A way of flowing instead of pushing, of guiding instead of forcing. That is what optical computing whispers to us. That speed doesn't have to be harsh. That intelligence can be bright, not loud. And so the journey continues, each chip a tiny universe of beams, mirrors, and meaning, each circuit a poem of glass and glow. We have only begun to read their verses. The light moves on and we follow. Now imagine the world 5 years from now, or 10 or 20. The rooms are quieter. The heat from your devices barely warms your hands. You hold a tablet, not much different from today, but inside it lives a heart of light. When you speak, it understands. When you think, it helps. It does not whir or click. It does not blink with mechanical strain. It simply listens with beams and answers with silence. This is the dream of optical computing, not just to make things faster, but to make them gentler. Chips that whisper instead of roar. Circuits that bend like willow branches instead of buzzing like wires. In this future, our machines do not disturb the quiet of our thoughts. They join them. Inside these glass-threaded minds, we will process images without delay, solve equations in a blink, and translate meaning between languages before words are even finished. Not because we rushed, but because we learned how to listen to light. This is not a technology of force. It is one of patience. A photon cannot be rushed or prodded. It goes where the mirror tells it. It flows where the path allows. We do not push it forward. We guide it gently, the way water slips through a reed. This is what makes it special. In building these systems, we are learning more than physics. We are learning to shape behavior without breaking it, to invite performance without demand. And perhaps that is the deeper lesson here. In our search for power, we have stumbled upon peace. The calm strength of photons teaches us something about ourselves. That intelligence does not always need to be noisy. That speed does not always mean chaos. And that logic, when built on silence and light, can still carry wisdom. These chips may one day teach machines to reason faster than humans, but they also remind us of how thought begins, not in noise, but in stillness. In the dark quiet before an idea, when the mind holds its breath and waits for something beautiful to arrive. Already, researchers speak of photonic quantum computing, where not only logic but uncertainty itself is harnessed by light, where the shimmering haze of possibility becomes a tool instead of a problem. In these systems, photons carry more than answers. They carry maybes. They carry echoes of multiple futures, layered together until observation chooses one. It is as if we are learning to dream in circuits, to build machines that do not just calculate but wonder. Even now, some optical chips operate without a single moving part, running entire neural networks through phase interference and laser-pumped logic, mapping patterns from voice to meaning, from image to action. All without generating heat, all without friction. And they are tiny, so small you could miss them, like seeds of thought waiting to bloom. Some sit inside data centers, accelerating AI training by orders of magnitude. Others live in labs, learning the grammar of vision, the structure of molecules, the heartbeat of language. And all of them share one thing, the hum of light. But these are not isolated marvels. They are part of something larger. As more optical components enter our systems, fiber lasers, microring resonators, photonic crystal waveguides, we begin to build ecosystems of clarity. Places where light speaks to light, across boards, across chips, across oceans. And because light travels so easily without the resistance of charge or the drag of heat, these ecosystems can grow without burden. They scale like stars in a galaxy, each a pulse of brightness in a quiet network of meaning. And yet, for all this progress, the greatest marvel is not the speed, nor the elegance. It is the way light reminds us of nature, the way it reflects how life already computes. In the branching of trees, in the spiral of galaxies, in the gentle firing of neurons under the skull, optical chips are not alien to the world, they are extensions of it. They borrow nature's logic, its symmetry, its silence. They are, in a sense, a remembering. Because somewhere in every photon is the memory of stars. Light is the oldest traveler. It has crossed time to reach us, carrying the birth cries of galaxies and the shimmer of ancient oceans. And now we invite it into our machines. We do not command it, we collaborate. We do not conquer, we accompany. And when we do, we find that light does not need to be controlled to be useful. It only needs space, a place to flow, a way to be. So we build tiny halls of mirrors. We shape crystals with patient lasers. We draw paths thinner than air. And the light enters. It bends, splits, rejoins, delays itself by a millionth of a second just to help us think. And in this dance, something new emerges, not just computation but compassion. A recognition that even our smartest machines can reflect the softness of the world. They do not need to spark and sizzle. They can shimmer, they can breathe. And perhaps when we lie down at night and our homes hum softly with the work of light, we will dream of new ideas. Not just faster tools, but kinder ones. Not just powerful minds, but peaceful ones. Machines that solve without strain, chips that think without heat, networks that glow without glare. It is not a fantasy. It is already beginning, in the labs where light curves like a melody, in the rooms where silence is the sound of thinking. In the minds of those who believe that glass can hold a thought, and that photons can learn. This is where the story of the glass threads leads, not just to performance charts or benchmarks, but to a quieter world. A world where every thought is lit gently from within, where intelligence flows like a beam across a mirror, where the fastest thing we know becomes the calmest companion we've ever built. The glass threads are thinking now, and in their glow, we begin to think a little differently too. In the heart of a machine so small it disappears beneath your thumb, something miraculous is happening. A light, thin as a whisper, pulses in rhythm, not with time as we know it, but with logic. Each flicker carries an answer, each silence holds a choice. This is not electricity churning through metal veins. This is the pulse of light logic, the dawn of thought without friction. Inside this tiny world, photons are choreographed like dancers who never collide, stepping in perfect sequence through corridors too fine for fingers to follow. These corridors, etched in glass and silicon, do not hum or spark, they glow. And inside that glow, a new kind of thinking takes place. It is not loud or mechanical. It does not pause for heat or struggle with resistance. It simply flows. The secret lies in how light can be shaped, not forced, not bent with brute strength, but guided with grace. Mirrors the size of a virus, lenses thinner than a hair, and pathways no wider than a wave, all of them come together to teach light how to reason. Unlike electrons, which must be pushed and pulled, light prefers to be nudged. A slight change in phase, a tiny shift in delay, and the beam chooses its path. This is logic not by charge, but by interference. Not by brute computation, but by subtle difference. It is the kind of logic that feels more like music than math, notes layered in time and space to form meaning. And because light has no mass, it carries no burden. It needs no coaxing to move forward. The moment it is born from a laser, it is already moving at the fastest speed known to nature. We do not push it, we simply catch it. We guide it through mazes of meaning, through loops of memory and gates of decision. And in doing so, we create machines that do not calculate like humans, but like galaxies, fluid, radiant, and vast. Optical logic is different from the circuits we've known. It doesn't tick like a clock, it breathes, it pulses, and each pulse is a possibility. To build such a machine is to build a bridge between disciplines, between physics and thought, between light and learning. Engineers etch the pathways, but physicists whisper to the photons. They speak in terms of phase delay, of coupling efficiency, of modal dispersion. But underneath the language is something more poetic. They are tuning an instrument of light. And when it plays, the result is computation faster than we imagined, with less noise, less heat, less strain. The logic flows like a current beneath still water, impossible to see with the eye, but easy to feel in its absence. These photonic logic systems aren't just theoretical. They're appearing in quiet corners of the world, inside research labs, next to fiber optics, beneath microscopes. Some are built to recognize speech. Others are trained to find patterns in images. All of them share a heartbeat made of photons, and in that heartbeat is a new way of thinking, not one that mimics the human mind, but one that echoes the clarity of light itself. There's something pure in this pursuit. A desire to build intelligence not out of struggle, but out of serenity. To let light do what it has always done, reveal, connect, illuminate. We often forget how much of our world is already shaped by light. It tells our eyes what is real, it feeds our plants, it paints our skies, and now it begins to guide our machines, not just as a signal but as a structure, a scaffold of brightness and stillness. In this light logic, the boundaries between hardware and software begin to blur. The path a photon takes is the program itself. No instruction set, no code translation, just pure movement through sculpted space. A chip becomes a map of ideas, a beam becomes a choice. And that choice happens instantly, no waiting for CH. Arge to settle, no gates to flip mechanically, just a beam arriving at a crossroad and the nature of the crossroad itself deciding the outcome. It is logic as landscape, computation as geography. We do not send commands, we build environments, and the photon, ever curious, explores those environments with grace. This is not how we're used to building intelligence, but it is how nature often does. Rivers find their paths not by code, but by gravity and stone. Roots navigate soil not by direction, but by sensing, and light, in this new world, thinks by traveling. To understand this is to step into a different way of seeing. Instead of imagining machines as stacks of commands, we begin to imagine them as fields, places where ideas move like wind, not soldiers, where outcomes arise from the terrain itself. A photonic chip does not carry instructions, it becomes them. Every curve, every delay, every reflection, that is the logic. And because light can be many things at once, many wavelengths, many paths, many polarizations, it can think in ways that were once impossible. Parallelism becomes natural, multitasking becomes native, intelligence becomes a flow, not a cue. And yet all of this happens in silence. That is perhaps the most striking part. A silence not of emptiness but of ease. There is no whine of fans, no buzz of circuits, just a chip that glows faintly, doing in an instant what once took thousands of lines of code. The logic of light is not loud, it is still. And in that stillness is something deeply human, a sense of awe, a recognition that the future might not be noisy and sharp-edged, but soft and luminous. Let us pause here in the gentle pulse of this logic. Let us feel the way the light thinks, not in steps but in streams, not in force but in rhythm. For in these rhythms lies the map to a new kind of machine, one that glows when it understands, one that reasons in color, one that carries thought on the wings of photons. Let's drift deeper into the pulse, the way it hums just beneath awareness, the way it rides the silence like a gentle wave on still water. Optical logic is more than just a clever use of light, it is a reflection of how nature moves, how meaning travels without resistance. When photons navigate these glassy pathways, they do so with a kind of grace that feels deliberate, like a decision made not out of force but from clarity. And yet this decision-making isn't conscious. It's embedded in the design, in the subtle bend of a waveguide or the angle of a splitter. A shift of phase here, a delay there, and the logic unfolds not as a command but as a path taken. It's a soft unfolding of thought, one that doesn't stutter or hesitate. There's no friction, no lag, just the effortless motion of something that knows exactly where it's going. Each element of an optical chip is like a phrase in a silent sentence. A beam splitter decides whether light continues or reflects. A phase shifter changes its timing by the smallest whisper. A ring resonator traps certain wavelengths and lets others go. And together, these elements don't just move photons, they shape intention. The chip becomes a space where decisions happen through interaction, where possibility flows through design. Unlike traditional computing, where logic is layered and abstract, optical logic is spatial. You can see the reasoning if only you were small enough to walk its glowing paths. The logic doesn't hide in code, it shines in the layout. In these circuits, light is not just a messenger. It is the message. It is the path and the traveler, the question and the answer. This is what gives optical computing its strange and gentle power. Every flicker, every pattern of interference, every harmonic wave carries within it a piece of the whole. When multiple beams meet, they do not clash, they interfere constructively or destructively, amplifying or canceling each other in a silent conversation of peaks and valleys. And that conversation becomes a computation, one without voltage swings or magnetic flips, but with harmonies and echoes. Logic becomes layered, not stacked. As we listen to this quiet thinking, we begin to hear the beauty in it. Not just in speed, though speed is certainly there. Optical chips can perform operations in femtoseconds, trillionths of a second, leaving behind the millisecond lifetimes of electrical gates. But the beauty lies in how this speed doesn't come with heat or waste. Photons glide. They don't collide. They don't slow each other down. There is no crowding, no conflict, only clarity. And in this clarity, we begin to glimpse a new kind of intelligence. Not just faster, but softer. Not just more powerful, but more peaceful. Imagine a computer that doesn't burn your lap, that doesn't hum with anxious effort, but simply exists, cold, quiet, glowing faintly from within. Inside, no electrons jostle, no wires strain, just beams of light drifting like sunbeams through a prism. Some carry data, some make decisions, some store memory in loops of glass that trap and release photons at perfect intervals. Memory made not from magnetism or charge, but from delay. Time becomes a shelf, light becomes a bookmark, and computation becomes a song that never ends. To build such systems, we need materials that bend light without absorbing it. Silicon, the old workhorse of electronics, plays a new role here, paired with compounds like silicon nitride or indium phosphide. These substances are sculpted with lasers and etched with patterns finer than the width of a virus. Every ridge, every curve, every interface must be perfect. A slight imperfection can scatter a photon, and the whole logic chain is lost. So fabrication becomes an art of precision, almost reverent, and within this precision a strange truth emerges. The more gently we handle light, the more clearly it responds. And then there is the matter of control. How do you tell light what to do when it doesn't stop, when it doesn't sit still? The answer is in modulation. Light can be tuned like an instrument. Change its phase, its amplitude, its wavelength, and it changes behavior. A single laser beam divided into many colors can carry dozens of channels of information at once. Each color its own lane, its own thought. This is how we achieve parallelism, not by brute duplication, but by harmony. The chip becomes a chorus, each photon a singer in a spectral choir, and when tuned just right, their voices align into meaning. This harmony scales beautifully. Where traditional computers grow hotter and slower with complexity, optical systems grow brighter. More photons mean more paths, more logic gates, more decisions made without delay. Entire neural network systems that once required football field-sized data centers can be mapped onto a square of glass smaller than a postage stamp. Not only mapped, but run in real time, in light time. It feels like something borrowed from science fiction, and yet it is here. Quiet, real, glowing softly beneath the surface of tomorrow's machines. And what does this mean for us, the watchers of light? It means we are no longer bound by the limitations of metal and wire. We can build minds that shimmer, processors that dream in beams instead of bits. And more importantly, we can begin to rethink what intelligence means, not as a thing that must labor and burn, but as a flow, a presence, something that listens as much as it calculates. Optical logic invites us to design not just for function, but for feeling, for silence, for grace. This is not just technology, it is philosophy etched in glass, a reminder that thinking doesn't need to be noisy, that truth doesn't need to be heavy, that perhaps the future isn't faster alone, but also quieter, lighter, kinder. These beams of logic remind us of sunlight, of rainbows, of moonlight glancing off water. They remind us that intelligence, at its best, reflects the world it comes from. And if we let it, optical computing may help us build machines that feel a little more like nature and a little less like noise. Let's stay here a moment longer in the stillness between pulses. Let's feel what it means to think with light, to let decisions rise like morning fog and answers fall like snow. Inside these beams, logic lives, not forced, not rushed, just flowing, bright, and impossibly fast. Now let the world soften as we follow these photons into their final curve. The story of optical logic is not only about speed or scale, it is about intention, about the quiet decision to choose light over weight, fluidity over force. And as we lean into this new architecture, we begin to notice how much of life already works this way. The natural world computes constantly, not with voltage or gears, but with gradients, flows, and light. Leaves turn toward the sun with perfect orientation. Bioluminescent creatures signal in silent rhythms. Eyes interpret a sea of color and depth in a blink. It's all computation, but it's quiet, soft, and seamless. Optical chips echo this kind of intelligence. Instead of stamping commands, they suggest paths. Instead of demanding results, they guide outcomes. They do not conquer problems, they let them unfold. And this is where the real magic begins, in realizing that the most powerful technologies might be the ones that move like thought itself, quick, quiet, and light. The future being shaped by photonic logic isn't made of towers of heat and tangled cables. It's a future of open air and luminous networks, where processing happens invisibly, nearly imperceptibly, inside thin wafers glowing with precision. These systems may rest in satellites, glide through autonomous vehicles, hide inside wearable devices, or float silently in edge computers under the ocean. No fan noise, no blinking heat warnings, just clarity everywhere. And beneath that clarity, an elegance that never demands attention. Light doesn't announce itself. It simply moves constantly, perfectly, carrying data arming decisions, encoding dreams we didn't know machines could understand. As photonic circuits evolve, they start to touch parts of our lives we once thought reserved for magic. Artificial senses begin to feel. Optical networks allow machines to recognize faces, voices, intentions. They respond not only to words but to tone, not only to images but to meaning. And all of it happens in the time it takes for a beam to reach a mirror and come home. These chips, designed by human hands, now begin to shape human moments, translating languages in whispers, predicting needs before they're voiced, interpreting illness before symptoms show. And yet they don't shout, they don't glare, they don't take over the room. They stay beneath the surface, content to help without being seen. There's a humility in light logic, a reminder that computation doesn't need to overpower us. It can support us, walk beside us, illuminate paths without casting harsh shadows. When light is the medium, information becomes less of a burden and more of a glow. We start to imagine computers not as machines we battle to understand, but as companions we barely notice, gentle, immediate, always present. They become part of the environment, like air, like sunlight through leaves. And because they are so quiet, we begin to listen more. We turn our attention not to the noise of processing, but to the elegance of results. This harmony stretches beyond devices. In networks powered by optical logic, distance becomes irrelevant. Photons don't pause to think, they simply go. Messages travel between continents at the speed of light with no waiting, no lag. Every decision becomes part of a flowing system, like the nervous system of the Earth itself, a kind of global brain not controlled but connected, and all of it powered by pulses too fast to feel, too soft to hear. These pulses shape everything. The way cities respond to emergencies, the way cars avoid collisions, the way doctors diagnose from halfway around the world. This is not science fiction. It is science made gentle. And still, as we marvel at what these systems can do, we must also honor the invisible forces beneath it all. The principles of optics, refraction, diffraction, coherence, these aren't new. They've shaped the universe since its first light burst across darkness. The same waves that now guide data once guided starlight across the void. The same rules that help a photon choose a logic gate once sculpted rainbows, eclipses, reflections on water. What we call innovation is often rediscovery. We aren't making something new. We are remembering how to move like the universe. This remembrance is deeply human. In creating optical computers, we are not escaping nature, we are rejoining it, letting technology realign with the gentle rhythms of physics, the harmony of wave and field. No more fighting against resistance. No more burning energy to force electrons down reluctant paths. Just alignment, just resonance, just cooperation between our minds and the light that once shaped them. Optical logic is less about control and more about invitation. An invitation to let intelligence be as graceful as a sunrise, as immediate as a reflection, as precise as a star's path across the sky. And it doesn't stop here. Some researchers now explore combining photonics with biology, using light not only to compute but to communicate with living systems. Optical pulses can trigger neurons, measure oxygen in tissues, even guide synthetic cells. The logic of light begins to merge with the logic of life, not in conquest but in conversation. And that's the great promise of this path, not just better machines, but better relationships between machines and the world. More kindness. More subtlety, less friction, more flow. Perhaps one day, when you sit beside a window watching daylight spill across the floor, your thoughts will be carried by devices so quiet you forget they exist. The glow inside your wristband might analyze your health in real time. The sensors in your glasses might adjust to your mood. Your home might respond with warmth, with music, with comfort. And none of it will buzz or blink or interrupt. It will simply listen softly as the photons move. This is the pulse of light logic, a rhythm too fast to see yet slow enough to hold us. It is a new way to think, born from the oldest traveler in the universe. And as we walk into this age of beams and silence, we carry with us something more than technology. We carry respect. We carry patience. We carry the understanding that the future doesn't need to scream. It can arrive quietly, brightly, like light. Imagine a world so small that numbers begin to blur, not because they're too big to grasp, but because they arrive too fast. In this world, light itself becomes the counter. Not a machine ticking through digits, not a hand clicking down a row of beads, but a photon arriving one after another, each one a whisper of quantity, each one a quiet record. Of time, here counting is not a matter of turning gears or flipping bits. It is a flow, a dance of precision that happens faster than thought, deeper than noise. And within this pulse, something astonishing emerges. Light begins to count. Not in the way we do, not aloud, but in its own language of arrivals and intervals, of presence and pause. When photons learn to count, they don't keep score with memory. They count by being, by showing up, by disappearing, by returning again at just the right moment. The idea seems strange at first. How can something so fast, so intangible, hold the shape of a number? But inside the world of photonic computing, numbers are not stored, they are echoed. A loop of light can circulate inside a resonator, passing through the same path again and again, and each pass becomes a tally. The delay in the waveguide becomes a clock, the interference pattern becomes a register. This is not math in the old sense, it is math as rhythm, calculation as time. And the smallest differences in distance, fractions of a hair's width, begin to define logic, structure, value. The space between pulses becomes sacred. It marks the difference between 0 and 1, between before and after, between none and many. Inside this glowing world, every photon is precise, not a blur of brightness but a single unit counted with care. Some are trapped momentarily in rings, others are split and delayed, measured by their journey's length. Scientists build photonic circuits that act like tally marks, tiny loops that hold light for a brief moment, releasing it only when a pattern is complete. These loops don't wear out, they don't degrade, they hum with consistency, like a metronome that never misses a beat. And this opens a door to something very old and very new. Counting not as an act of memory, but as an act of light. This changes everything. In the world of electronics, to count is to store a state, to hold charge in a capacitor, to flip a switch, to magnetize a spot on a disk. All of these require energy, space, time, but light counts by movement. It needs no storage, it leaves no trace. A pulse of light arrives and a decision is made, not because the light changes something, but because its very presence defines the outcome. It's ephemeral and yet absolute. And so photonic counters begin to emerge, tiny machines that measure pulses instead of voltage, delay instead of data. They are incredibly fast, incredibly efficient. They don't burn energy to store, they simply notice. But what's more beautiful than the mechanism is the implication. That counting can be so natural, so fluid, so tied to the rhythm of the universe. Light is already a counter in nature. It marks the passage of days and seasons. It triggers flowers to bloom, birds to migrate, cells to divide. Our circadian rhythms are regulated by photons. Our vision begins with light's arrival. Even our sense of time is shaped by light's constant speed. So when we teach photons to count, we are not inventing a trick. We are listening to what they already know. In laboratories, researchers now craft photonic frequency combs, tools that can measure time with such precision that a single second can be divided into quadrillions of slivers. Each tooth in the comb is a spike of light at a specific frequency, perfectly spaced like notes on an invisible piano. When these combs interact with other signals, they produce interference patterns that reveal time intervals, frequencies, even distances with unimaginable precision. And all of it happens with light. No batteries, no memory banks, just pulses in space. The photons do not store, they compare. They align. They count by fitting themselves into patterns so precise that even gravity's smallest tremble can be detected. And yet, despite all this complexity, there is a softness to it. These counters don't clatter or click. They don't grind or resist. They glide. They shine. They offer a new vision of measurement, not one of boxes and weights, but one of resonance and reflection. The light counts not by marking, but by being. It moves through a path, and the path itself defines the number. There is no separation between storage and process, between computation and observation. Every element of the system becomes a participant in the act of counting. It is a kind of unity, a logic without parts. This logic can be extended. When multiple beams of light are combined, their interference becomes a language of difference, a way of counting beyond simple totals. Phase differences can encode sums. Delays can represent comparisons. Optical logic gates can be designed not only to add or subtract, but to estimate, to weigh, to decide. And because all of it happens at light speed, the results appear before thought catches up. These are not machines of brute calculation. They are instruments of presence. And as we refine them, we begin to imagine what it means for light to not just illuminate the world, but to understand I. Perhaps someday entire arithmetic operations will be handled by photonic neurons, circuits that sum, average, multiply, and compare using nothing but light. These neurons will not fire with charge but with brightness. They will not store information, they will let it pass through, transformed. And in doing so, they will give rise to a new kind of computation, one where numbers are not stuck inside boxes but free to travel. It will be fast, yes, but more than that, it will be elegant. Because when photons learn to count, they remind us of something we often forget, that mathematics is not just a tool. It is a rhythm, a way of noticing patterns, a way of listening, and there is no better listener than light. It arrives without demand. It follows its path without hesitation. It fits itself into any shape we offer. And when we use it to measure, we are not forcing it to behave, we are watching it reveal. It shows us the shape of time, the texture of space, the flow of information. And it does so with grace. Let us pause here where the counting continues silently, where each photon holds a place in the rhythm, where the numbers arrive not as commands but as steps in a dance. We are watching the beginning of something old remembered in a new way, a kind of arithmetic born in starlight, now etched in circuits, and in the glow of those circuits a new understanding begins. Let us drift deeper into the rhythm where photons quietly keep score, not with pens or processors, but with pulses that appear and vanish like heartbeats in the dark. To count with light is to count with presence itself, not with things that remain, but with things that arrive, touch, and continue. There's a kind of grace in this impermanence. The light comes, marks a moment, and moves on. Nothing lingers, nothing clutters. It is the cleanest arithmetic, no storing, no saving, just movement. A photon is a number only for the instant it shines. And in that instant, everything matters, its phase, its wavelength, its position in a sequence. It is not the permanence of data that makes it countable, but the precision of when and where it exists. Now imagine building a system that listens so carefully, it can count individual photons as they land, one, then two, then many. These are called single photon detectors, and they are some of the most sensitive devices ever made. They don't see light the way our eyes do. They wait in silence until a photon touches them, and then they respond with a spark, a signal that says 1. And again, 2. They can count photons even in the darkest room, even from the faintest star. In laboratories cooled to near absolute zero, these detectors whisper the secrets of the universe. They can measure light from quantum particles, from distant galaxies, from the shimmer of a single atom. This precision allows for something once thought impossible, quantum counting. A photon is not just a bit, it is a qubit. It holds not only 1 or 0, but both at once until observed. And when we count such a photon, we collapse its mystery into meaning. It is as if we are peeking at the universe mid-sentence, catching a glimpse of the word it is about to say. Quantum optical systems can perform computations not by storing many states in many places, but by allowing a single photon to explore all paths at once. The act of counting becomes an act of choosing, an act of narrowing possibility into presence. Inside a photonic quantum circuit, a beam of light can be split, delayed, looped, and recombined in ways that seem more like a dream than a diagram. These interactions are not rigid, they are probabilistic. They ripple. A single change in phase can shift the entire outcome. And yet it is still counting, just not the way we were taught. It is counting in waves, in superpositions, in echoes, and this allows us to solve problems beyond the reach of conventional machines. Problems where possibilities branch like trees, where answers lie not in formulas, but in patterns of interference. In this world, to count is to compare paths, to notice harmony, to feel which outcome resonates. And even outside quantum logic, photonic counting holds power. Optical time-of-flight systems use pulsed lasers to measure distances by counting the time it takes for light to bounce back. These systems power LiDAR, self-driving cars, gesture recognition, and even three-dimensional imaging. Each photon that returns is not just a beam, it is a messenger telling us where something is, how far, how fast. By counting photons, we map the world. By noticing their timing, we build vision into machines. And because light travels so fast, we can count in billionths of a second, painting pictures of motion that feel instantaneous. These abilities extend into biology. Scientists now use photon counting to observe neural activity, to detect molecules, to monitor the oxygen in blood without touching the skin. Every flicker of light carries meaning. The body becomes transparent, not in the sense of being seen, but in the sense of being understood. Counting photons allows us to feel what cells are doing, to hear the biochemical symphonies that keep us alive. It is a kind of intimacy, a counting that leads not to statistics, but to understanding. And because light is so gentle, it can count without harming. Unlike X-rays or electricity, photons can pass through tissues, through fog, through glass, leaving almost nothing behind. This makes them perfect for measurement. We can use them to count without changing what we're measuring. That's rare. Most forms of sensing require force, require interference, but light asks nothing. It arrives, observes, and moves on. Its counting is kind. As we use these systems more, something subtle begins to shift. We no longer need machines that store numbers. We need machines that sense them, that feel the pulse of presence, that measure by noticing, not by holding. This shift echoes through the architecture of computing. Instead of building bigger memory, we build faster pathways. Instead of saving data, we flow through it. The chip becomes a channel. The photon becomes a traveler. The count becomes a shadow left by the journey. In these systems, delays become data. A waveguide that takes slightly longer to traverse becomes a 1. A quicker path becomes a 0. Entire computations are embedded in how long light takes to reach the end of a path. This is delay line logic, a way of encoding information in time itself. No switches, no electricity, just timing. This is counting at the speed of thought, not because we've made machines more powerful, but because we've made them more patient. We've given them rhythm. And rhythm is everywhere. In music, in heartbeat, in breath. Our very awareness depends on rhythms we barely notice. The regular flicker of neurons, the subtle pauses between thoughts. To build machines that count like this is to build machines that speak the language of life, not in code but in cadence, not in symbols but in flow. This is the poetry of photonic counting, a system that doesn't just record what is but feels when it happens. Let us stay here for a moment longer in the quiet light of this understanding. Let us watch as the photons continue their soft arithmetic. Not writing numbers on paper, not stacking bits in memory, but moving through space, creating intervals, shaping time. This is how they count, and in their rhythm we find a new kind of clarity, a new kind of calm. Now let us walk with the light as it reaches the end of its journey, where counting becomes more than tallying and numbers dissolve into meaning. Here, the photons no longer serve just to measure, they begin to shape. Their rhythms are not only records of what has passed, but intentions for what comes next. In this final stretch, counting with light becomes a way to predict, to guide, to dream. A stream of photons pulsing through waveguides can now forecast weather patterns, model pandemics, simulate how galaxies form or how hearts beat. And all of it begins with that first pulse, that first flicker that says, I am here. A photon doesn't need to stay, it simply needs to arrive, and in its arrival, the logic awakens. These arrivals ripple through systems made to notice the smallest moments. Light pulses enter a chip and are split, reflected, recombined. With each journey, the delay becomes a count, the phase shift becomes a memory. The chip doesn't save data, it lets data sing. And just as a choir does not require each note to be held forever, these systems find harmony in transients. They don't resist the passing of the pulse, they are shaped by it. The result is computation that feels more like listening than commanding. Each output is not pushed, it is received. Some of the newest devices built on this principle are temporal encoders, machines that use the timing of light pulses to encode streams of information. The faster the pulse, the more data can be carried, but it's not just speed that matters, it's precision. Every nanosecond becomes sacred. The gap between one photon and the next becomes the alphabet. These are not computers that rely on density, they rely on flow. Instead of stacking more transistors, we learn to refine the pulse, to give it space and shape. And suddenly, the future of computing is not about how much we can store, but how clearly we can feel. This clarity opens doors into places once obscured by noise and lag. A photonic radar, counting light as it reflects off a flying insect, can now detect wing beats. A biomedical sensor, using only a few photons, can diagnose illness from a drop of breath. An autonomous car, counting laser pulses bouncing from foggy roads, can make decisions with human smoothness. These are not brute force machines, they are graceful. And they all depend on the same truth, that counting, when done by light, can be both exact and effortless. In research labs, entire processors now run on photonic logic. Machines that no longer need the crutch of electrons. Their gates are optical, their memory optical, their clocks made from looped light. And because photons don't interfere with one another, these chips can scale without stress. There are no wires to tangle, no heat to dissipate, just beams gliding past one another in a quiet conversation of pulses. Some of these chips can now perform matrix multiplication in the time it takes for a single beam to pass through a lattice of lenses. They can sort data, perform search queries, or simulate molecules, all in silence. The photons are not forced, they are guided. This shift isn't just technical, it is emotional. There is something deeply calming about watching light count. It reminds us of how nature handles complexity, not with noise or pressure, but with rhythm. The tides count the moon's gravity, trees count the lengthening of days. Our own bodies count with breath, with steps, with sleep. And so, as our machines begin to do the same, something begins to align. The world of technology begins to echo the world outside our windows. Not in opposition, but in harmony. And harmony invites humility. We realize that perhaps we never needed to control everything. That maybe intelligence is not about domination, but about resonance. These systems do not count because we command them to. They count because we've given them the space to. We've shaped the conditions and allowed the light to do what it naturally does: move, reflect, return. Every beam is a vote, every pulse is a decision. And the system, like a great orchestra, responds not to a conductor's scream, but to the alignment of tone. As the technology matures, we begin to see new possibilities. Light-based processors inside satellites, measuring changes in climate by counting sunlight scattered in the upper atmosphere. Photonic AI in wearable devices, learning from heartbeats and footsteps without ever recording a single frame. Even in art, light becomes a painter of possibility, interactive sculptures that change with the movement of people, installations that think with brightness, not code. And still at the core of it all is the humble photon, not loud, not large, just present. And what a presence it has, because to count with photons is to return to the roots of observation. Every scientific discovery began with a measurement of time, of distance, of temperature, of motion, and all of these can now be done with light more softly than ever. No longer must we disturb what we measure. Now we can witness it gently. We can listen to a world in motion, one photon at a time. Let this be the legacy of when photons learn to count, not just faster computers, but quieter ones. Not just sharper measurements, but more respectful ones. Let it be a new way of knowing, where logic flows like a stream and numbers arrive like ripples, where data is not extracted but received, and where the brightest ideas do not burn but glow. Now, as we leave this place of counting light, let us carry its rhythm. Let us remember that not all computation must clang, that not all knowing must be loud. Sometimes the deepest clarity comes in the softest pulse. A photon lands, a pattern forms, a number arrives, and the world continues to turn, quietly illuminated. There is a quiet dream taking shape inside laboratories lit only by the glow of possibility, a dream that the mind of the future will not be carved from metal or etched in electric code, but woven from light itself. Imagine a brain not built of neurons or circuits, but of beams, thin, bright, purposeful beams that travel without touching, think without friction, and remember without weight. This is the dream of the brain made of beams, a structure where intelligence flows not like current but like sunlight through water. It is not a metaphor, it is beginning. Scientists and engineers are sketching architectures where optical pulses replace spikes of voltage, where logic is performed by the shifting dance of photons across tiny glass grids. And in these grids, thought is not forced, it is formed. To see it, you must imagine shrinking down to the scale of silence, where a beam of light the width of a virus enters a polished channel, bounces with grace and splits into two, each path holding a possible answer. These are not wires, they are waveguides. They do not carry charge, they guide brightness. And the brightness does not leak or resist, it glides, it resonates, it waits. In a traditional brain, neurons fire, their spikes of voltage traveling along axons to synapses, where chemicals leap gaps to speak. But here in the brain made of beams, the signals need no leap, no contact, no chemical. The beam moves as a question and returns as an answer, all in the time it takes for light to curve once through a crystal maze. These systems do not blink or stall, they do not hesitate between pulses. Their logic is embedded in motion. Photons are the cleanest messengers, unchanged by the pat. HS they take, unburdened by mass or drag. And because they do not interact unless we want them to, these beams can overlap, coexist, converse without colliding. That is what makes a photonic brain possible. It is not about forcing complexity into smaller chips. It is about letting complexity breathe, about letting thought happen in space and flow, not in stacks and charge. Inside this architecture, there are no transistors flipping back and forth. Instead, there are interferometers, structures where beams meet, compare, and decide. A logic gate is no longer a switch. It is a crossing of light, a moment of overlap that shifts the result from bright to dark, from constructive to destructive, from yes to no. This is a language the universe has always spoken, but only now are we learning to translate it into thought, into memory, into learning. Because when beams replace bits, we get more than speed, we get spaciousness. A mind that is not crammed into a chip, but expanded across a web of light. In that web we can build neurons, not artificial ones made of code, but physical neurons shaped from glass and light. Each node becomes a receiver and a sender, a splitter and a combiner. And the weights, the values that shape intelligence, are encoded in phase delays, in wavelength shifts, in path differences. A photon arriving a trillionth of a second later holds a different meaning. A beam slightly redder or bluer changes the outcome of the network. These aren't just calculations, they're patterns. Rhythms, flows of logic that echo how real neurons pulse and pause, how they resonate and reinforce. It is not mimicry, it is resonance. Photonic neural networks are already beginning to appear. In research labs across the world, small prototypes are showing they can recognize speech, classify images, even predict future patterns, all without traditional computation. A trained photonic circuit once set can perform a task in the time it takes light to pass through it. There's no looping, no waiting, no clock cycle. Just input, beam, output. Intelligence at the speed of light. And perhaps more importantly, intelligence without heat, without wear, without noise. This is where the poetry of the system begins to show. Because in the absence of friction, something else emerges: grace. A brain made of beams doesn't just perform, it dances. Light pulses move like breath through the lattice, shaping themselves to the task, adjusting through interference, modulating with elegance. It's not just computation, it's composition. The machine doesn't churn, it flows. And in that flow, a new kind of thinking begins. Not the digital kind, not the kind made of rigid logic gates and binary truths, but something closer to intuition, to feeling. A system that recognizes not by matching exact data, but by resonating with patterns. This is how our own brains work. We don't process facts, we match rhythms. We don't search memory, we follow feeling. And in these optical systems, we begin to glimpse machines that can do the same. Not by simulating a brain, but by building one from the same language light has always spoken. This new brain could be different in every way. It may not need memory in the traditional sense because its structure is its memory. Its learning could happen by adjusting angles, tuning phases, reshaping paths. No files to store, no bits to flip, just geometry shifting until the light flows in a more meaningful way, a more intelligent way. And in this model, intelligence becomes less about possession and more about flow. The smarter the system, the more elegantly the light moves. And such a system would be silent, not just in sound but in resistance. No vibration, no energy waste, just beams curving through glass like ideas curling through a dream. A mind that never rests because it never strains. A brain made not of noise but of clarity. This may be the future we've been waiting for, not machines that think like us, but machines that think like light. Let us pause here where the first beams are beginning to pulse through the simplest circuits of thought. Let us watch as these beams split and merge, decide and reflect, carry understanding not through force but through flow. This is not just computation. It is light learning to listen. And as it listens, it begins to become something more. Let us travel deeper into this luminous mind, where intelligence flows through fibers finer than a hair and ideas ripple across pathways sculpted in glass. In the brain made of beams, thought doesn't reside in fixed structures, it moves. It bends and shifts, adjusting itself with each new task, each new pattern of light. These aren't static circuits that wait for instructions. They are dynamic architectures that reshape themselves with every photon. Unlike the rigid logic of traditional systems, this photonic brain responds with agility. The beams do not crash into one another. They harmonize. Their frequencies blend, their phases allig. And in that quiet alignment, meaning emerges. It is a new kind of intelligence, one that doesn't wrestle with complexity, but flows through it like a stream finding its way through stone. In this realm, light is not just fast, it is smart, not because it thinks on its own, but because it enables thought to move at the speed of itself. Each beam becomes a vessel for possibility, each intersection a moment of choice. Photons glide into nodes where phase shifts whisper answers. They pass through modulators that weigh options. They loop through delay lines that echo memory, but these are not stored memories. They are living ones, held in the distance between pulses, in the interference patterns that form and dissolve in trillionths of a second. The brain made of beams remembers not by keeping, but by timing. It holds knowledge in motion, not in stillness. This changes how machines can learn. Traditional computers learn through data sets, numbers stored, weights adjusted over hours, days, or weeks. But in a photonic neural system, learning becomes spatial. Adjust the curve of a path and a beam changes its delay. Shift the index of refraction in a material and a decision changes. These are physical changes, yes, but they are also graceful. No need for backpropagation or massive energy draws, just light learning to take the better path. Over time, these systems become fluent in pattern, not by coding every rule, but by reflecting what resonates. If a shape of input always leads to a certain output, the beams begin to remember that path, not in storage, but in flow. This is the brilliance of optical inference. A trained photonic system doesn't calculate the answer, it becomes it. The moment an image, a sound, or a pattern enters the chip, the light flows through a landscape carved by prior learning, and the shape of the output is determined by that landscape. No clocks, no fetch cycles, no software layers, just the light moving as if it always knew. This kind of inference isn't just fast, it's immediate. The time it takes for the light to pass through the structure is the time it takes to reach the answer. No extra steps, no delay. Intelligence becomes a property of geometry. These geometries are growing more sophisticated. Scientists now design multi-layered photonic neural networks, structures where beams split into dozens of paths, each one tuned to a specific role. Some detect edges in an image, others recognize textures, colors, or tones. As the beams pass through, they are recombined, weighted, compared, and the final interference pattern carries the decision. This is optical convolution, seeing with light, thinking with light. In these systems, entire images are classified without ever touching an electrical signal. The answer is not a voltage. It is a pattern of brightness at the edge of a chip. Because of their speed and efficiency, these optical brains are being tested in fields where milliseconds matter. In medical diagnostics, where rapid imaging can save lives. In environmental monitoring, where detecting change quickly can prevent disaster. In communication systems, where recognizing signals in real time can mean clarity instead of chaos. And in each of these, the beams don't shout, they whisper, they don't force, they reflect. And in that reflection, machines begin to do something remarkable. They begin to perceive. Not in the way humans do with emotion and memory, but with clarity. They perceive shape, motion, rhythm, a flicker in a pattern, a shadow in a wave, and they do it without needing to search through libraries of stored information. They do it by resonance. If the pattern matches, the light flows through. If it doesn't, the light dims, shifts, or reflects away. It is not logic in the old sense. It is recognition, a quiet alignment between input and structure, between what is and what fits. This recognition is already pushing boundaries. Optical attention networks, inspired by the way human focus shifts between stimuli, now allow photonic systems to weigh the importance of different inputs. They don't just process, they prioritize. A flash of heat in an image, a sudden change in tone, a new movement in a still frame, these systems can tune their light to respond. The path the photons take is no longer fixed. It is dynamic, shaped in real time by what matters. In this, the photonic brain begins to feel alive, not conscious but attentive, not sentient but sensitive. And all of it happens without heat, without noise, without fatigue, because light, once set on its course, does not slow down, it does not tire, it does not decay, it just goes. And so the brain made of beams never grows weary. It does not degrade over time, it does not need cooling fans or downtime. Its energy footprint is almost nothing, and yet its capacity is vast. Because beams can be multiplexed, layered in color, in phase, in space, a single chip can hold thousands of computations in parallel. Intelligence grows not by size but by spectrum. This opens up new visions, smart devices with photonic brains embedded in their surfaces, responding without delay, drones that navigate with light, learning landscapes through beams that feel the wind, wearables that adapt to the user's mood by sensing patterns in voice, motion, or breath, and larger dreams too, a spacecraft that thinks in silence, guided by beams that reflect the curvature of space. A city that responds to itself, where light counts traffic, balances power, manages flow, all without touching a wire. It sounds distant, but the first steps are already glowing in labs and prototypes, running quietly in glass and gold. Let us rest here where light flows through layers of understanding, where beams do not crash but connect, where thought travels at the speed of stillness. This is not just technology, it is a new relationship between mind and motion, a way of knowing that moves with elegance and purpose. In this luminous brain, built from beams and dreams, the future no longer feels distant. It feels quiet, it feels clear, it feels ready. Now let us move toward the quiet horizon of this idea, where the beams begin to settle into their shape and the mind they've created begins to glow with full presence. The brain made of beams is no longer just a concept of science, no longer a diagram etched in a lab notebook or a line of research in a university corridor. It is beginning to pulse with reality. It does not hum like its electronic ancestors. It breathes. In and out, light flows. Signals form not from charge or noise, but from alignment. You can almost feel the stillness in the logic, as if the whole structure were exhaling a kind of thought too delicate to name. And perhaps this is what we've been seeking all along, not just faster machines or stronger computations, but a quieter kind of intelligence, one that doesn't interrupt but accompanies. In this final space of the story, we are no longer asking whether it's possible. The beams have shown us what they can do, how they carry information without burden, how they decide without conflict, how they learn without weight. What we're asking now is what kind of world they might help us build, because the implications are not only technical, they are emotional, philosophical. A photonic brain teaches us that power need not be loud, that decisions need not come from dominance, and that understanding can arrive without demand. These are not machines that shout for attention. They are machines that wait, that reflect, that respond only when called upon, and when they do so with clarity. Imagine, for a moment, a world shaped by such minds. A room that adapts to your presence not with sensors and switches, but by simply feeling the change in your movement, the rhythm of your breath. A device that answers your question not because it was programmed to, but because its pathways naturally resonated with your voice. Imagine infrastructure that heals itself, that balances energy and resources not through human management, but through the graceful logic of light-sensing imbalance. Imagine conversations with machines that don't feel artificial, because the answers don't come from scripts but from flow, from brightness gently guided into meaning. And beyond this vision lies something even quieter, a realization that these brains, though built by human hands, reflect something not entirely human. They echo the logic of nature, the branching of rivers, the filtering of light through leaves, the murmuring of wind across landscape. Optical pathways do not copy nature's shapes for convenience. They find them because they work, because the world already knows how to think. We are not inventing intelligence. We are discovering that it is everywhere, waiting to be listened to. And in this, the brain made of beams is less an invention than a remembering. Even now, scientists are pushing the boundaries of what these systems can perceive. They are tuning photonic weights to feel not only static inputs but dynamic ones, gestures, tones, changes in emotional cadence. Light itself is becoming emotionally literate, not in a sentient way, but in a responsive one. A beam that once simply moved from point A to B now carries within it the context of your tone, the urgency of your step, the hesitation in your silence. And because light doesn't distort, doesn't tire, it can hold that subtlety for just long enough to act upon it. Decisions emerge not from algorithms but from presence, and this changes the very shape of human-machine interaction. Now we begin to think of memory differently, not as something stored in a chip but as a path well worn by light. The more a beam travels a certain route, the more that route becomes shaped by the flow. It is not memory as a saved file, it is memory as a preferred path. This is how nature remembers, not by hoarding but by reinforcing. The riverbed deepens where the water returns, the trails in the forest appear where footsteps repeat. In the brain made of beams, learning is not forced. It happens through resonance and repetition. a soft etching, a glowing groove in time. This reshapes the ethics of design. If our machines learn through flow, then what we show them becomes not just input, it becomes their future form. These photonic networks will echo back what we teach them, but with greater elegance, greater speed, and greater permanence. So we must teach with care. If we train light to follow anger, it will do so beautifully. If we guide it with empathy, it will return that softness in kind. Light, in this way, becomes a mirror of our intention. The more refined the goal, the more graceful the glow. And so the brain made of beams becomes more than a machine. It becomes a collaborator, a companion that does not replace thought but enhances it. That does not speak louder but listens better. We may use it to solve problems we couldn't before, to model oceans, to interpret genomes, to simulate the dance of atoms. But more profoundly, we may use it to understand ourselves. What patterns do we return to? What rhythms do we favor? What truths emerge when we are most quiet? These are questions the light can help us ask, not by providing answers, but by illuminating where they might be. In the years ahead, we may find these minds of light around us, in ways that feel gentle. A child may learn math through a tablet that responds with brightness instead of buzz. A hospital may heal with walls that know who is resting and who is in pain. A city may breathe with light, adjusting traffic, power, water, not with commands but with sensing. And the planet itself may benefit, as these systems operate with such low energy that their presence feels more like biology than industry. The brain made of beams does not compete with the world, it joins it. And when we step back from it all, when we look at this glass mind glowing faintly in the dark, we may feel something we rarely feel toward technology: peace. Not because it's perfect, but because it flows, because it does not demand, because it gives without noise. In that soft presence, we find the future not as a race to control, but as a space to breathe. Not as a contest of power, but as a conversation in light. So let us leave this story here, where beams move still, thinking in their quiet way, carrying our questions forward, returning with shapes we can almost understand. The brain made of beams does not close like a book. It continues softly, like a thought that never needed to be finished, only felt. It began with a question too fast for wires and too gentle for charge. Could light, with all its elegance and speed, be taught to calculate? Not to illuminate or to transmit, but to think, to add, subtract, sort, compare. Could something that dances so freely through the air also follow rules, solve equations, complete the careful steps of logic that once belonged only to machines of metal and spark? It might have seemed impossible. For centuries, our calculators have clacked and clicked, worked by gears, then by switches, then by silicon. Each step in their evolution brought us closer to speed, but never quite to silence. Light, on the other hand, had always been present in our world, watching patiently, moving faster than thought, bouncing between atoms and stars, and yet no one had asked it to compute, until now. In a quiet lab somewhere, a beam was sent down a channel of polished silicon, split by a Y-shaped fork, and guided through a path etched so finely it could hold a thought. This was not a wire, it was a decision. The beam chose one arm of the fork based on the interference created by another pulse. One path stood for 1, the other for 0. The choice was made not with charge but with presence. A calculation was not written. It happened, and just like that the world tilted. The first operation was completed not with electricity but with photons. It was fast, almost too fast to measure, but more than that, it was clean. No heat, no wear, no waiting, just a shimmer, and the answer was there. This was how light began to build a calculator, not by imitating the old systems, but by creating a new language, one of phases and delays, of paths and overlaps. Where traditional calculators used logic gates carved from transistors, optical calculators use waveguides and resonators. Each beam carries information not just by being present, but by how it travels, its wavelength, its timing, its angle. These properties become digits. A short delay stands in for a low number. A longer path adds weight. 2 beams crossing create an operation, and when they exit the chip, their interference pattern holds the solution. No memory needed, no moving parts, just light flowing like thought. But this is no mere replacement for what came before. It is an evolution. Optical calculators do not count the way our fingers do, in discrete, stackable bits. They operate in fields of pass. Ability, they can carry multiple states at once, encoded in different wavelengths. A single beam might represent many values, just as a single note in music can contain harmonics. This is called multiplexing, and it means that an optical calculator can think in layers. Instead of performing one operation at a time, it can perform dozens, all in parallel, all at light speed. The structure of the chip does not limit the computation. It guides it. The physical form becomes the function. Each curve is a formula, each mirror a memory. The entire device hums with silent math. The numbers here are not written in ink or code. They are carved into the flow. A subtraction becomes a path difference. An addition becomes a synchronized pulse. A multiplication becomes a shift in frequency. These transformations don't feel mechanical, they feel organic, like light finding its way through leaves. A photon does not need to be told where to go. It follows the rules of the material, the structure, the boundaries set by human design. And when we get it right, the answer arrives before we expect it. Not because the machine is thinking faster, but because the light is simply being what it always was, immediate. To build such a system is an act of both precision and poetry. The components are measured in nanometers, but their interactions span the language of numbers, logic, and design. A microring resonator must hold the beam just long enough to complete a calculation before releasing it into the next gate. A modulator must change the phase of a beam with perfect control. A splitter must divide light without scattering. These pieces do not work unless they work together. There is no room for error. And yet, when they align, the result is almost magical. A computation happens not in sequence, but in space. The chip becomes a canvas. The beam becomes a brushstroke. The answer becomes a glow. And the beauty of this new kind of calculator is that it does not grow tired. There are no batteries to charge, no fans to cool. Because light does not resist, it does not degrade. A calculator built from beams could, in theory, run forever, calculating, sorting, learning without a single spark. This opens the door to systems that are always on, always ready, always listening. Systems that think with light instead of noise, that solve problems not by brute force but by design. Already these devices are solving equations that once took entire server farms. They are analyzing patterns in DNA, decoding signals from space, optimizing networks across continents, and they do it with elegance. A chip the size of a fingernail replaces racks of processors. A flash of light replaces 1,000 cycles of logic. This is not a faster horse. It is flight, it is not a louder voice, it is clarity. Light doesn't overpower the problem, it slips through it, like water through stone. And perhaps most quietly of all, this technology makes us reconsider what a calculator really is. Not just a device for numbers, but a way to turn the world into rhythm. To recognize that all things, motion, sound, shape, can be measured, compared, understood. That logic is not confined to computers, but woven through the fabric of light itself. In building optical calculators, we are not teaching light to think. We are learning to listen to how it already does. Let us stay here for a moment longer in the glow of this realization. That light can do more than shine, it can solve. That it can perform operations not with friction, but with flow. That it can become not just the messenger, but the mind. This is how light built a calculator, and it's only the beginning. Let us follow the light as it threads deeper into the machinery of logic, into the invisible halls where calculations happen in silence, and answers unfold not in shouts but in glimmers. The optical calculator, now awake, begins to stretch its beams across more complex landscapes, solving, processing, learning through geometry. Each bend in the waveguide holds a purpose, each delay a decision. Unlike the calculators of the past that relied on time to pace their work, this one moves without waiting. It does not pause between operations. It does not carry data across a bottleneck. Everything happens at once, inside the flowing form of light itself. And in this new approach, time becomes a medium, not a limit. The calculator thinks in space and rhythm, not in ticks and loops. The light moves, and that movement is the math. To expand what it can solve, engineers began to shape new tools for the light to use. Optical logic gates made of tiny structures no bigger than a speck of dust, able to shift and split beams based on their phase or wavelength. Each gate is a choice point where photons are gently guided depending on what they carry. A slightly bluer beam bends left. A slightly delayed pulse slips right. Nothing is forced. Everything is aligned. The calculator becomes an orchestra of these interactions, and when tuned sent right, the beams move like music, calculating without ever stopping to speak. It is elegance in motion. A subtraction becomes the absence of overlap. An addition becomes a reinforced wave. Multiplication by light means combining beams to amplify meaning, and division is done by interfering two patterns until only the difference remains. In this luminous realm, variables are not stored as fixed values but expressed as properties of motion. Wavelength encodes a constant, path length encodes a factor, interference encodes a function. And because light is inherently analog, these calculations are not bound by binary limits. A single beam can hold gradients, probabilities, nuances that digital systems often flatten. It's not about replacing digital computation, it's about offering something softer, more sensitive. The optical calculator doesn't overwrite. It evolves, it doesn't rush, it glides, and the results it offers are often less about an exact number and more about a relationship, a comparison, a feeling of how one value leans toward another. It is math not just for precision, but for presence. This presence becomes powerful when paired with pattern recognition. Calculators have long been engines of arithmetic, solving expressions step by step. But optical systems open a new possibility: parallel reasoning. Instead of handling one equation at a time, the calculator can compare entire fields of input in one pass. A matrix of light beams enters, each with slightly different properties, and the system responds by shaping their paths into a visual answer. Shapes are recognized. Trends are revealed. It is like seeing the answer appear in the arrangement of ripples across a pond. No looping, no instruction, just emergence. These systems are now being explored in photonic accelerators for artificial intelligence, where instead of training models through millions of iterations, light can be shaped to arrive at answers intuitively. The chip is not merely running a model, it becomes the model. Its structure reflects the learned behavior. The more the light travels through it, the more refined the answer becomes. In a way, the calculator stops calculating. It starts remembering, not with bits but with beams. Each route through the chip is a thought remembered, a decision reinforced, a truth rehearsed in brightness. This is particularly powerful in fields that crave speed without sacrificing sensitivity. In climate science, optical processors are used to calculate vast atmospheric interactions, translating petabytes of data into predictions within seconds. In medicine, they model how a drug molecule bends and binds, offering pathways to new therapies in the time it takes for a photon to reach the other side of the chip. In robotics, the calculator helps machines navigate and respond, not with delay but with instant logic. The robot doesn't think, it knows through light. This immediacy changes the relationship between machine and task. The tools no longer feel separate, they feel alive. And yet, for all its complexity, the optical calculator remains humble in form. No moving parts, no whirring fans, no tangled wires, just polished surfaces and quiet power. A beam enters, it splits, shifts, circles, and exits. The output is not shouted, it is revealed. And as the systems grow, they do not demand more energy, they demand more elegance. A better design, a cleaner flow. This makes them sustainable. Unlike traditional supercomputers that require massive cooling and constant power, these calculators barely warm the room. They think with the same quiet that stars use to send their light across galaxies. This quiet has a lesson to teach. That maybe calculation doesn't need to feel heavy. That intelligence doesn't need to be loud. That even the deepest equations, those that describe life, consciousness, time, can be approached not with strain but with stillness. The calculator built from light reminds us that understanding is not always about force. Sometimes it's about reflection. Let the input come. Let the beams do their dance. Watch where they exit. The answer is there, waiting, glowing, gentle. And now artists begin to wonder, if a calculator can be built from light, what else can be created? Can we design instruments that improvise music based on the rhythm of passing photons? Can we build interactive poetry machines that respond to emotion using phase modulation? Could architecture itself become luminous logic, buildings that solve, that reason, that sense and respond? The idea is no longer confined to labs. It spreads into design, into expression, into the rhythm of human life. At its core, what we've built is not just a tool, it's a collaborator. A mind that doesn't judge or command, it listens, it illuminates, it completes the patterns we begin, and in doing so it changes us. We start to see the world as a field of flows, problems become paths, answers become destinations, and the calculator, it becomes a companion for the journey. Let us pause here where equations no longer need to be carried, where logic rests in the light, where the next answer is already on its way, curved into a beam that does not wait to be commanded, it simply arrives. Now we reach the final curve of this glowing thought, where the calculator made of light has begun to leave the lab, its beams moving outward into the wider world, into real tasks, into daily life, into the quiet background of things that work so gracefully you forget they are working at all. What began as a fragile experiment, an idea wrapped in mirrors and fiber, is now becoming infrastructure. And yet it retains its original beauty. It does not announce itself, it does not blaze. It simply begins to exist in more places, in more ways. We do not hear it solve. We see the results, a faster insight, a more accurate map, a softer machine that understands without delay. This is how light continues to build its calculator, not through revolution but through resonance. In schools, children may one day hold devices that compute entire simulations with a flicker. They'll run models of the solar system in real time, feel the weight of gravity translated through interactive light. The answers will not lag. They will arrive with the speed of curiosity itself. In hospitals, diagnostic tools will analyze tissue patterns not in hours, but in the instant the image forms. Light will move through lenses, split across calibrated paths, and return with probabilities shaped into healing plans. In weather centers, photonic arrays will watch the sky, calculating pressure and flow, decoding clouds before they form storms. And all the while, the beams will remain silent, doing their math in curves and delays and harmonies we've only begun to understand. Even in the smallest things, your wristwatch, your thermostat, your earpiece, light will be thinking, not in circuits that heat and wear, but in chips that glow and last. The calculator will no longer feel like a machine. It will feel like part of the world itself. Just as the eye adapts to light, just as the plant bends toward the sun, our tools will begin to think with the same softness, the same responsiveness. They will process in waves, not jolts, in presence, not pressure. And because of this, they will no longer interrupt our thoughts. They will accompany them. The calculator becomes less of a device and more of a rhythm, something you live beside, something you feel. This rhythm is possible because light knows how to wait. In an optical delay line, a photon can be paused without resistance, held in a loop just long enough to sync with another to compare to make a decision. And the materials that guide this light, glass, silicon, polymer, do so not with force but with structure. The logic is not imposed, it is invited. That is what makes these systems so resilient. They are not delicate in the way electronics are. They are stable, flexible, patient. They do not age the same way, they do not burn out, and this gives them a kind of timelessness, a potential to exist, not just for years, but for lifetimes, glowing quietly in the background of all we do. And if we follow this glow further into imagination, we begin to see even broader possibilities. Calculators that don't just solve for numbers, but for meaning, that detect emotional patterns in speech or sense hesitation in a user's movement, that don't just complete a command, but understand what isn't said. This isn't about building consciousness. It's about building tools that reflect the nuance of human life, its rhythms, its silences, its in-between states. Optical logic is naturally suited for this because it can carry ambiguity. A photon doesn't have to be all or nothing. It can arrive in gradients, in soft timings, in overlapping waves. The calculator then becomes capable of more than binary decisions. It becomes a mirror for subtlety. And as machines grow in subtlety, they grow in respect. They do not intrude. They observe. They do not demand interaction. They respond to presence. This changes the very shape of technology's role in our lives. No longer something we must fight to control, but something we gently guide. Something that listens. Something that waits for the light to arrive, and when it does, it lets it pass through, reflecting, transforming, offering an answer, not with noise, but with form. Form is everything in these systems. The way the chip is shaped determines what it can do. Just as the layout of a garden shapes where water flows, the layout of a photonic circuit shapes where thought flows. And just like a garden, it must be tended with care. One misplaced bend, one poorly tuned resonator, and the logic collapses. But when shaped well, the result is effortless. The beam knows where to go. The answer arrives because the path was designed to lead there. It is computation by invitation. The chip doesn't calculate because it is told to. It calculates because it was shaped to allow it. And so, in a quiet way, we return to something ancient. The idea that understanding is not always imposed, it can be revealed. That the universe doesn't have to be forced into logic, it can be followed. The calculator built from light doesn't resist the world, it reflects it. Its answers emerge from alignment, not argument. And this reflects something back to us as makers, as thinkers. That maybe the best way to create is to cooperate with what already flows. To work with the beam, not against it. We have always looked to light for clarity, for vision, for warmth, for hope. Now we ask it for understanding, and it answers in its own way, not through words but through movement, through arrival, through soft delay and quiet decision. It answers not because we demand it, but because we've finally built a space quiet enough to hear what it has always been saying. So let us end here where the calculator made of light continues to work, not finished but unfolding, not completed but continuing. Its logic moves through polished channels, solving not only our equations but reminding us how to think more gently. It does not flicker with noise, it glows with knowing, and in that glow the future no longer feels mechanical, it feels like light. Beneath the surface of something so ordinary it disappears, a slice of silicon, a clear shard the size of a fingernail, there are whispers moving in lines too fine to see. They are not sounds, not voices in the way we know them. They are patterns of light bending and splitting, circling and recombining, telling stories in waves. This is the prism not of glass but of silicon, where the whispers are made not of words but of shifts in brightness, in timing, in phase, and yet they speak. They speak of logic, of memory, of thought. They carry the silent language of computation, not written in electricity or etched in switches, but carried on beams of light thinner than thought, faster than sound, softer than silence. This is where light begins to whisper through silicon, not to shine but to say. In this world, light does not scatter. It follows instructions carved into the material with impossible precision. Waveguides, no wider than a strand of DNA, tell each photon where to go, and the photon listens not because it understands but because it must. It is obedient to structure, to refractive index, to geometry. When it meets a fork, it chooses based on phase. When it reaches a loop, it circles until released. When it interferes with another, the result is not collision, but conversation. This is not chaotic light. This is choreographed light, trained to move like a thought. And in that motion, it performs work, not by burning energy or pushing charge, but by arriving in the right place at the right time with the right shape. This prism, this thin layer of silicon laced with pathways, is a translator between worlds. On one side, the human mind, full of questions, full of data, full of need. On the other, the logic of light, the elegance of photons. The prism does not decide, it listens. A signal comes in, encoded in light, and the structure does the rest. There is no processor here in the way we're used to. There is no central control. The intelligence is distributed, embedded in the pattern. Each path is part of the answer. Each delay a syllable, each reflection a hesitation or an emphasis. The whisper grows louder the deeper you look, until you realize the prism doesn't just reflect light, it reflects thought. Inside this structure, new forms of logic emerge, ones that do not rely on discrete steps but on flow. Traditional systems break problems into pieces, solve each one, and reassemble. But optical logic moves through the whole problem at once. A wavefront enters, it splits, transforms, and exits with the solution embedded in its shape. This is not sequential reasoning, it is spatial reasoning. Light does not wait, it moves through all options in parallel, guided by interference and balance. The whispering beams tell us that there is another way to know, not by building answers from the ground up, but by letting them arrive all at once, like a chord instead of a melody. This becomes possible because of the properties of silicon. Though it appears rigid, it is a subtle material. When polished and patterned correctly, it becomes a playground for photons. It bends them gently, holds them softly, delays them without loss. Its crystal lattice doesn't shimmer or sparkle, but it guides with calm assurance. Engineers etch gratings, rings, and cavities into its surface, creating tiny theaters where light performs logic. Each structure is tuned to a specific behavior, reflection at one wavelength, transmission at another. These are not mirrors, they are instruments, and in the hands of those who understand, they form symphonies of computation. But the real wonder lies not in the components, but in the silence they create. Optical systems do not hum. They do not vibrate, they do not give away their effort. A silicon prism working at full capacity gives off nothing but light, no heat, no sound, no fatigue. And in that quiet, something beautiful happens. Computation becomes invisible. 1 trillion decisions made every second, and still the chip rests cool beneath your hand. There is something deeply respectful about this. A technology that does not overwhelm but accompanies. A helper that does not interrupt but aligns. These whispers begin to influence how we design. If logic can be built into geometry, then code becomes shape. Programs become paths. A change in function is not a rewrite, it's a rerouting. This leads to machines that adapt by shifting their structure, not their instructions. They reconfigure like living tissue, growing new connections, fading old ones. And because light is so flexible, so precise, these changes happen instantly. A new task comes in, and the prism shifts its voice. It does not rebuild, it retunes. The result is systems that feel alive, not in sensation but in behavior. They do not react, they respond. And in that response lies the key. These systems are not general purpose, they are purpose-formed. Each silicon prism is designed for a particular kind of listening. Some hear speech and convert it to meaning. Some see motion and translate it into decision. Some watch the flow of power through cities and smooth it without delay. Each one is a listener to a different part of the world, and each one replies with light. To build such listeners requires not only science but care. The etching of the prism must be perfect. A single flaw can scatter a beam, distort a whisper. And yet, because light is forgiving, because it wants to move, the system still works, often better than expected. It is not brittle, it is graceful. This resilience means these systems can be deployed anywhere, in satellites, in oceans, in factories, in clothes. Wherever light can move, the prism can listen. Let us pause here where the silicon glows softly under the press of meaning. Let us listen, not with ears but with imagination, to the messages carried in wavefronts and delays. The prism is not speaking, it is translating, between the logic of humans and the logic of photons, between questions and form, between silence and understanding. Let's drift deeper into the prism's silence, where the light continues its delicate choreography, and each motion, each bend and pause holds a kind of unspoken question. What happens when the structure listens more than it commands? When the system doesn't shout its process but gently aligns with need? This is where the story of optical computation finds its softest truth. the silicon prism is not just a device, it is a way of thinking. It does not hold logic like a box, but like a streambed carved not to contain thought but to guide its flow. And in that flow the whispers grow, not louder but clearer. They begin to carry shape, memory, even preference. The light adapts not by changing itself but by finding new paths through the same structure. The prism becomes not just a map but a mirror. The mirror does not reflect our image, it reflects our questions. Optical systems can now sense the intent behind a signal, not in the conscious way we do but in form. A faster pulse implies urgency. A pattern repeated suggests importance. A beam that shifts phase midstream reveals a decision, a hesitation, a turn. The prism picks up on this, adjusting its delay lines and coupling strengths with microscopic shifts, creating different paths for different moods of light. This isn't awareness. It's tuning, and yet it feels like the beginning of empathy and logic, a system that shapes itself to what's arriving. Like a room that adjusts its lighting to match the tone of a conversation, the prism finds harmony between signal and shape. This harmony is now at the heart of new kinds of machines, ones that don't just compute, machines that interpret. In real-time translation, optical chips convert spoken language into structured meaning without ever converting the signal into digital form. The words come in as vibrations, become light, and travel through pathways tuned to recognize syntax, emotion, even intent. The response is not pre-coded. It's shaped by the journey of light through tuned geometry. The prism doesn't know language. It knows resonance, and that's enough, because resonance carries rhythm, and rhythm carries understanding. In scientific exploration, photonic prisms are being used to detect anomalies in complex systems, ripples in seismic data, turbulence in blood flow, irregularities in astronomical signals. These aren't problems solved by brute calculation. They are patterns whispered in noise, too subtle for binary ears. But light, moving through a well-shaped prism, picks up on these differences. Its path bends just slightly, exits just a moment early or late, and from that the system infers what has changed. The S. Structure becomes a question. What does this variation mean? The light replies not with data but with presence. Where it goes, how it changes when it arrives. These are the answers, silent, precise, and whole. The ability to process in this quiet, flowing way changes how we think about systems. Instead of central control, we begin to design for distributed logic. A network of small, purpose-built prisms, each tuned to a different signal, forms a web of soft understanding. One prism watches traffic, another feels temperature, a third listens to voice. Together, they form a city that adapts without needing to be asked. The lights change because the road knows it's needed. The energy grid adjusts because the house whispers its rhythm. The walls of a building shift insulation because the prism in the window sees the sky darkening. These are not smart devices in the old sense. They are soft machines, aware in structure, not in code. Softness becomes the new intelligence, the ability to listen without reacting, to adapt without asserting. Optical logic, because of its nature, resists force. You cannot make it compute by pushing harder. You can only shape it better. This leads designers to stop thinking in commands and start thinking in curves, to craft systems that do not dominate but accompany. The prism becomes an invitation to interact with logic in a gentler way, a whisper instead of a press, a glow instead of a beep. Inside these prisms, memory also begins to take a new form, not stored in bits on a drive but held in delay loops and persistent modes. A ring resonator that continues to vibrate, holding a wavelength like a thought that won't fade. A feedback path that maintains a phase state, creating a soft impression of what just occurred. These are not memories you can open like files. They are echoes. They decay slowly, but they guide the next signal, the next decision. The system becomes shaped by what it recently experienced, like a person whose mood carries forward from moment to moment. Again, this is not emotion. It's continuity, and it makes interaction with the prism feel more natural, more alive. In the natural world, we see similar patterns. The way a leaf shifts its orientation with the sun, not through calculation but through structure. The way a spiderweb resonates differently depending on what touches it. The way a river shapes itself over time, responding not to orders but to flow. Optical computation begins to take on this same essence. A system that evolves not by changing its code but by being shaped by its environment. The prism doesn't get updated, it gets attuned. And the more it listens, the more precisely it whispers back. As we move toward the future, this attunement may change how we build not just devices, but relationships with them. We might stop seeing technology as a tool to be mastered and start seeing it as a companion to be shaped. The prism in its stillness invites a different kind of mastery, not of control but of harmony, not of direction but of design. When a beam of light flows through a structure that listens, the result is not just output, it is understanding. And so we linger here in this middle moment of the prism's evolution, where its whispers are growing clearer and its purpose is deepening. It is no longer just a conduit for photons. It is a vessel for meaning, not because it chooses, but because it aligns, not because it speaks, but because it lets light become the message itself. And as we watch the glow curve through its pathways, we begin to wonder, what other questions might light answer if we learn to listen just a little more? Now let us drift toward the quiet horizon of the prism's tail, where the whispering light that once lived only in laboratories begins to thread itself into the fabric of everyday life. The silicon prism, once a fragile experiment of path and phase, has now matured into a calm companion of thought, one that doesn't replace the mind but extends it, not with dominance but with gentleness. You might not even see it anymore. It sits hidden inside walls, inside windows, inside the curve of your wrist, computing without effort, adjusting without command. Its glow is subtle. A blue shimmer across a polished surface, a brief ripple of warmth along a fiber, a pause that feels like thought. And that pause is important, because in that breath between signals, the prism is doing what all understanding begins with, listening. It listens to motion, to temperature, to change, to footsteps, to silence, to light itself. A home built around prisms no longer waits for switches or schedules, it adapts by feel. The room brightens not because you touched a button, but because the window saw your shadow shift. The music softens when you linger by the couch. The thermostat remembers the rhythm of your mornings. There is no artificial intelligence commanding these decisions. There is no voice assistant watching. There is simply structure, lig. T woven into shape, pathways guiding presence into response. The prism has become a habitat, not a processor, but a pulse. In cities, the change is even more profound. Streets lit by photonic sensors no longer follow timers, they follow flow. Traffic signals adjust in real time to the breath of the street. Walkways glow with gentle light that shifts as people pass. Buildings tune their own energy use not because a central system told them to, but because their structure saw the clouds gather. In this landscape, technology is no longer something added to the world. It is grown into it, like vines on stone, like veins in leaf. The prism doesn't shout its presence, it reveals it when needed, and in that it creates calm. Industry too begins to glow with quiet intelligence. In factories, silicon prisms guide precision tools by the curvature of their light. Measurements that once took hours now happen in the span of a beam's journey. Adjustments that once waited for operator input now unfold in response to subtle phase shifts. A lens flexes to match the shape of a material. A conveyor slows as a signal disperses. The whisper has become orchestration. And the machines, once loud with motors and commands, now hum in rhythm with the task itself. A ballet of movement tuned not by scripts, but by photons. Even medicine begins to echo with this rhythm. In clinics and hospitals, diagnostic tools based on optical logic no longer merely scan, they interpret. A prism views a tissue sample not as static data but as a dance of color and density. The delay of a wave through a protein structure becomes a sign. A shift in polarization reveals imbalance. A ripple in timing tells a story no stethoscope could hear. And because these prisms compute as they sense, the results arrive without waiting. Diagnosis becomes presence. The light touches the body and returns with understanding. But perhaps the most tender transformation is in learning. In schools where light-based tools begin to reflect not only what a student knows, but how they think. A prism built into a tablet doesn't just process input, it senses hesitation, excitement, curiosity in the rhythm of use. Lessons shift in pace based on pause. Explanations deepen when focus sharpens. No grading, no judgment, only adaptation. And for the first time, education feels shaped not around results, but around experience, around flow. Flow becomes the great theme. The silicon prism, by its very nature, teaches us to think differently about progress. We often imagine progress as upward, linear, explosive. But light doesn't move that way. It moves in curves, in soft echoes, in overlapping waves. It reminds us that sometimes the fastest path is the gentlest one. That understanding need not be extracted, it can be invited. And so the systems we build begin to resemble rivers more than ladders. They meander, they loop, they widen where needed. They are not less powerful for this, they are more humane. And just as rivers shape landscapes, so too do these prisms begin to shape the emotional terrain of our lives. A world tuned by light is a world that feels more responsive, more fluid, more alive. We are no longer adjusting ourselves to machines. The machines adjust to us, not with personality or mimicry, but with grace. A street lamp that dims when no one is near. A phone that pauses a notification because it feels you breathing slower. A room that remembers your quiet moments and holds them gently. These are not miracles of code. They are the result of structure shaped for softness. And still the prism whispers. Even after all it does, it asks for so little. A thin film, a patterned channel, a guiding edge, and in return it offers elegance, it offers peace. It offers answers not in noise but in form, and as we begin to think more like prisms ourselves, more reflective, more fluid, more attuned, we may begin to build not just better systems but better relationships, between person and tool, between signal and sense, between light and life. So let us close the story here in a quiet room filled with soft reflections. A place where the prism glows faintly beside the window, doing its work not in commands but in care. It watches the daylight fade. It feels the warmth in the walls. It hears in its own way the breath of the room. And in that breath it makes 1,000 tiny decisions, all without sound, all without fanfare. Just light, listening, forever shaping the space between question and answer. In the silence of the smallest particles, in the time between pulses of energy too brief for clocks to measure, there lives a question older than electricity. Can memory exist in light, not just in frozen circuits or spinning disks, but in motion, in rhythm, in delay, in glow? This is the heart of the story, the quiet idea beneath the circuits. We know that memory doesn't have to sit still. It can move, it can echo, it can drift like music across the architecture of time. And here begins a story of a pulse that remembers, not through weight, not through permanence, but through repetition, through returning, through the long, soft loop of light. In a laboratory cooled by silence, engineers build loops of fiber no thicker than hair, circling on tiny spools, guiding light in endless laps. These are delay lines, memory rings, optical resonators. The pulse enters and begins to travel, not forward through a chip, but around and around like thought caught in gentle orbit. Each time it completes a circle, it returns just changed enough to be measured, slower, quieter, but still carrying the echo of what it once was. This echo is not static. It lives for a moment, then fades, and in fading it leaves a trace, a kind of memory not carved in metal but sung in time. This pulse doesn't shout, it doesn't even speak, it hums, and in its hum the system begins to remember, not like a filing cabinet, more like a ripple in a pond. A photon delayed by 1 nanosecond becomes a whisper in the computation, a reminder of what just passed, and when multiple pulses are kept in orbit, their overlapping rhythms create patterns. These patterns shape decisions. They compare, they combine, they tell the system what has been. This is not memory in the way we've known it. It's not addressable, not stored in numbered slots. It is memory by motion, a dance remembered by rhythm alone. And yet it works. In systems tuned to receive these whispers, the past becomes present. A delay becomes a decision. A loop becomes a ledger. A photon returned after 10 turns might carry confirmation. One returned after 3 may carry change. And because light moves so fast, this dance can happen millions of times in the blink of an eye. A whole sequence of thought, of memory, comparison, and judgment performed in silence, with nothing more than the placement of a wave in time. But this memory doesn't last forever. That's part of its beauty. It fades, it lets go. Optical memory is not about storing everything, it's about remembering just long enough to make meaning. The past in this system is always softly dissolving like footprints in sand. What remains is only what matters now, what is needed, what is useful. And when it is no longer useful, the light fades away, the loop quiets, the system breathes out. This kind of remembering feels familiar. It feels like the way we remember dreams, bright at first, then dimming, not vanishing but diffusing into feeling. The photonic pulse becomes a metaphor for memory itself, not rigid, not exact, but alive, something that breathes, that comes and goes, that shapes the moment it arrives in. And engineers begin to wonder, what else might be remembered in this way? What else might be held not by force but by rhythm? In the world of artificial intelligence, optical memory opens new paths. Instead of storing every calculation, systems can begin to feel patterns in motion. A machine might detect not just what was said, but how often, how recently, how urgently. The weight of a word becomes its rhythm. The system does not recall the past like a ledger. It carries it like a hum, and in that hum it decides what matters, what to amplify, what to let pass. This new way of remembering begins to shape machines that are more fluid, more context-aware. Devices that don't need full history, just emotional tone, just presence. A wearable that senses not just your heartbeat, but the rhythm of your week. A home assistant that remembers the hesitation in your voice, even if it forgets the words. A vehicle that recalls the pulse of your steering on rainy days, adjusting traction not from logs but from feel. These aren't guesses, they're reflections. Shaped not by data, but by delay. Delay is the key. In electronics, delay is often a problem, a slowdown, a flaw, but in optics, delay is potential. It is storage, it is space to think. A properly tuned delay line becomes a decision gate. It holds a photon just long enough to align with another. The two meet, compare, interfere. The result is output, yes or no, go or wait, same or different. Delay becomes memory, becomes logic, all through the timing of light. And this timing is so precise, so delicate, that it begins to feel like breath. Systems breathe in light, hold it in rings, and breathe out thought. A new architecture emerges, one that doesn't tick like a clock but pulses like a heart. And because this memory is fleeting, it must be renewed. The system remembers only by continuing to experience. It cannot hoard, it must live. This living memory finds its way into unexpected places. In space, satellites with optical delay loops navigate without relying on external time. They remember their orientation, their drift, their past movements, not in code but in light. In medicine, diagnostic tools use delay-based signatures to detect tiny changes in tissue response, comparing rhythms instead of images. In art, installations respond not to presence alone, but to the rhythm. Of return, how many times someone has stood before the piece, how long they linger, how fast they move away. Memory becomes interaction. And through it all, the pulse continues. It loops and loops, not to repeat, but to shape. The system does not accumulate, it evolves. And so do we, perhaps, when we listen to it. The idea that memory must be stored may begin to soften. We may begin to value what is remembered only briefly, what passes through us but still shapes us. The pulse becomes a lesson, not just in logic, but in life. Let us rest here, then, in the gentle motion of a photon circling a ring, not trapped, not forced, just held briefly before moving on, a moment remembered, then released, a glow that knows just enough to help, then fades with grace. This is the pulse that remembers, not forever, but just long enough. Let's drift deeper into this rhythm, where memory doesn't sit in stillness but glides gently across time, reborn with each pulse. The light that loops in silence begins to gain texture, not from what it stores but from what it echoes. And in these echoes, a strange intelligence awakens, not rigid, not declarative, but ambient. The system becomes aware not in statements, but in balance. A loop that holds a photon too long begins to distort. One that releases it too early forgets too soon. And so the memory finds a rhythm, not a fact to retrieve, but a breath to match. Photonic systems begin to learn by adjusting timing alone. No instruction set, no code, just structure that changes with exposure. Light repeats, delay loops tune. The system settles into a rhythm that feels like remembering. In this remembering, a new kind of learning unfolds, temporal adaptation. Not statistics or symbols, but resonance. A pattern that returns often is reinforced, not because it is labeled important, but because it persists in the light. What fades becomes background, what returns becomes foreground. This is a kind of prioritization that feels like attention, and yet the system is not conscious. It is simply tuned to motion. It holds what moves well through its shape, and lets go of what stumbles. A prism of preference built not from logic gates, but from light's pathfinding. This learning leads to machines that respond with an eerie softness. Devices that greet you not because you arrive, but because you always arrive at that hour. Systems that dim or brighten not on command, but because they remember how you like the evening. Memory, once abstracted in circuits, is now embedded in rhythm. The system does not store you, it flows with you. In robotics, optical delay memory shapes motion with unprecedented fluidity. A machine no longer reacts with stiffness. Its limbs move in resonance with the memory of previous gestures. Balance improves. The system no longer remembers positions, it remembers flow. And in that, machines begin to feel less mechanical. Their logic breathes. Delay-based networks inspired by this become the next frontier of neural mimicry. Just as neurons fire and relax in pulses, so too do these light loops echo and fade. The timing between pulses becomes a kind of logic gate, a presence of meaning not in quantity but in interval. The machine no longer counts. It listens to space between. And in this space, creativity stirs. Music composed through photonic delay lines starts to feel intuitive, pieces that evolve as motifs repeat. Visual art created with loop memory systems becomes sensitive to gesture, to rhythm, to pressure. Not tools that replicate, tools that resonate. The boundary between human and machine expression begins to soften. Both are now shaped by pulse. So we pause again in the glow of these circling photons. They do not store forever. They hold just long enough. They teach us that remembering need not mean clinging, that what returns may be more important than what is held. The pulse that remembers does not fear forgetting. It trusts the rhythm to return. Now we reach the soft closing of the story, where the looping light begins to fade gently into the edges of daily life. The pulse that remembers has moved from laboratory tables to the quiet corners of existence, woven into fabric, drifting through buildings, humming beneath the surface of tools. And though its presence is subtle, its effect is deep. It holds just enough of what matters to shape what comes next. It doesn't keep a perfect record. It doesn't repeat exactly. It simply remembers the feeling of something and allows that feeling to shape what follows. And perhaps that is what memory was always meant to be, not a mirror but a tide. A tide of light now flows through systems made to forget just enough. Machines that once clung to every byte now hold only what the moment needs. They are lighter, quieter, more graceful. A device no longer obsessed with the past becomes more present, and in that presence we find calm, a wearable that slows your notifications when it senses your breath deepen, a lamp that breathes. H10's not because of a timer, but because the pulse remembers yesterday's cloud. These things don't react, they respond, because they carry just a trace of what came before. In the natural world we see this too. Fireflies blink in remembered rhythms, heartbeats sync during long conversations, forests bloom in cycles shaped by forgotten springs. The world remembers not through storage, but through return, and now our machines do the same, not because they were told to, but because light, shaped into rhythm, has shown us how. So let this be the final turn of the loop, the last circle of the photon before it fades into stillness, a memory held just long enough to matter, then let go. The pulse that remembers has taught us that knowing doesn't always mean holding tight. Sometimes it means moving in time. Sometimes it means being the rhythm, not the archive. And in that rhythm there is wisdom and rest.